Hey there, Independent Scientologists. Discover a new perspective to your bridge by visiting ao-gp.org. Get in session with remote auditing using the Theta meter. Are you curious about where you stand? Head on over to ao-gp.org now and take our free personality test. Join the growing group of Independent Scientologists today. Hey there, Independent Scientologists. Discover a new perspective to your bridge by visiting ao-gp.org. Get in session with remote auditing using the Theta meter. Are you curious about where you stand? Head on over to ao-gp.org now and take our free personality test. Join the growing group of Independent Scientologists today.
Hi, and welcome to another AOGP Outside of the Church podcast. My name is Jonathan Burke. I'm here with Quentin Stroud on a, now sunny Saturday morning here in South Africa. We are going to do part 5 of our Para-scientology podcasts on the way to Halloween next week. This one's going to be on granting beingness. We had a listener request a podcast on it, so we're going to entertain her and dive into granting beingness. And I bet you're wondering, what does granting beingness mean? And how is it Para-scientology? Well, it's going to get really interesting, so stick around. Quentin, I'm going to have you start this one off and explain to people what granting beingness is, if you don't mind, while I get my notes together, and we'll get rolling.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, when she mentioned it, it was interesting because the way I received it was, how does it, what is it, how does it help, or whatever. So granting beingness, blah, is basically or putting life into something, right? It's where a Thetan can imbue something with life. It involves the creative energy of a Thetan, and really it is being able, and we kind of say it a little bit colloquially, kind of walking a mile in someone else's shoes, kind of putting yourself there, right? And so granting beingness actually allows that person or thing or whatever to be as it is, to be who they are, to be. And without any resistance, without any, pushback or push against it. And what that actually does, in my opinion, and we can go deeper into it in the conversation, but what it actually does is it allows one to have a more Theta environment, right? Whether it be granting beingness to your physical items and stuff, right? Like we talked about in the last podcast on the factors, we talked about the car and this classic car, this beautiful car, and the way you admire it and the way you put your care into it, whatever. You're granting beingness to this machine, this thing, and it has presence. It shines like with the wax on the paint, and whatever, however you take care of it. So you're granting beingness to this thing, and I think that that's very beneficial to having a more Theta environment.
Well, it's interesting to note that to grant something or someone beingness, you have to be willing to be in it or their space. I mean,
Yes.
that's, if I mean, you ever walked up to somebody and you walk into their space and you go, yeah, I can't do this.
Yeah.
and
I'm not
that's
staying here.
yeah, that's a Theta perception. As a being, you're picking up how somebody is without them ever saying a word. And maybe and I'd say, at least for me, more often than not, I'll pick up somebody's space when I haven't even seen them and they're behind me. And I'll either go, ooh, or hey, this is nice, type of a thing. So that is what you're perceiving is their beingness, their space. And that is not something that is, to me, it isn't a physical thing. It's a, for lack of a better expression, a spiritual thing as a Thetan that you're just perceiving, you're just knowing what's around you. And that's the first hurdle you have to get over is, what if I don't like this person and I've never even said a word to them? You were going to say?
That's a thing. Well, yeah. No, I was just going to say, because as this conversation progresses and as we kind of build upon each of the layers a little bit. The space thing, the being in somebody else's space is a huge part of it. And
Mm-hmm.
we're going to talk about that a little bit later on because LRA says some really, really powerful stuff about that in the Auditor's Handbook.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll say this, and you just said it a moment ago about like what happens if you don't like somebody and you never even met them, like you don't even know like what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So me in traveling around the world and have been in so many places and so many spaces, so many environments, I personally don't like being around a lot of chickens. I don't know what it is to chickens, but
You mean like chickens? Like
like chickens,
chickens?
yeah. Like I live in the Philippines.
Yeah, they're all
Everybody
over
got
the place.
chickens.
Yeah, everybody's
Yeah,
got
chickens
chickens.
just
Yeah,
walk around the street like squirrels.
right.
And so it's a thing. And so um being able to be in these different spaces and these different places around the world, you have to be able to grant a lot of beingness. And this is
Mm-hmm.
why I believe that traveling is actually very beneficial. Just number one, change of environment. But number two, it opens one's viewpoint up a little bit. It opens one's
Mm-hmm.
dimension points up a little bit. You can actually get to see like other parts of reality that are real lives of people all around the world, the way they
Mm-hmm.
live, the way they eat, the way they
Mm-hmm.
do, certain things, take care of the children, whatever it is. It opens up your life to kind of those kinds of things. And so traveling, in my opinion, is a form of granting beingness in that you're able to be in these other people's environments and spaces and cultures and lives
Mm-hmm.
to whatever degree.
Yeah, well, yeah, you get a lot broader palette of comparable magnitudes. My great grandmother used to say, "A rolling stone gathers no moss, but gains a brilliant polish."
Ooh, I'm
Yeah.
gonna write that one down. Wow. I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
put that on Facebook.
Yeah, and that while you were talking, it was making me think of reach and withdraw. The it's
Mm-hmm.
it's a phenomenon, and it's a process, and it involves every process that we have in Scientology and Dianetics is reaching and withdrawing. And when you go to a new place and you leave it, and you go to a new place and you leave it, and maybe you go back to the other place and you come back, that's reach and withdraw, and that raises
Mm-hmm.
your ARC for that particular place. And one way to improve the granting of beingness of a place is the process of reach and withdraw. You can do it yourself, or you can have somebody do it with you. I recommend somebody doing it with you as a partner, as an assist or an auditor, and having them, like, let's say you fly into an area that you're not familiar with, like I don't know what would well I came to South Africa and got to the international
Oh,
airport, and
when I went to Johannesburg,
they had a hole in the ground, and that was the toilet.
yeah,
A hole in the ground. There
I've been
wasn't
there.
any
I've
porcelain.
I've been in places like
There
that.
wasn't any porcelain, and this was acceptable. Uh, but
Right.
in your surroundings, and being able to grant something beingness, you can have a person reach for that object, withdraw from that object, reach for another object, withdraw from that object, reach for that object, withdraw from, and you can even do it with people. If you get somebody that's willing, you meet somebody in the street market and you explain to them and say, okay, reach for that vendor. Thank you. Let go of that vendor. Thank you. And
Mm-hmm.
this raises your ARC with the person, or you can do locationals to get more in common their environment to be able to grant a place beingness. I'll be perfectly honest with you. The Far East, I have absolutely no interest in being in whatsoever. None.
I love it here. I love it.
None. I just look at it as ew. It just I can't. They talk fast, and it's dirty, and there's crime and
That is not true.
pickpockets,
That
and
is not true.
but see, that's and the reason why I'm saying this is a preconceived consideration of the physical universe that a person has. This is where
Uh,
bias and prejudice come from. This is why somebody
mm,
can't grant beingness for something,
yeah.
is they have a fixed idea that is based off of TV and movies, and it's
Boy, oh
something
boy.
completely different.
Propaganda, half truths. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's more dramatic to make it that way. And I mean, Hong Kong looks have you been to Hong Kong?
No, I have not been to Hong Kong.
Okay. Hong Kong looks like Manhattan,
Yeah.
on steroids, with all of the glitz and the glitter and the lights and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But there's still Dirtiness. I felt the same way about New York City before I went to New York
Oh, I
City in
did not like New York
1980,
City.
86. And I got to New York City and it was like, wow, this is, I mean, it seemed familiar to me. I was there last
Hmm.
lifetime and the lifetime before that and the lifetime before that. But uh yeah, it was dirty and there were people convulsing on the sidewalks in the streets. And, it was just
Hmm.
like I
Smell
thought it
like
was.
urine.
Smelled like urine. Yeah,
Mm.
I walked 30 blocks in Midtown Manhattan as a high school senior to go to the music
Wow.
stores on 54th Street from Macy's
Wow.
while everybody else went to Macy's. So, that was my one of my first examples of ew from the Midwest with cows and grass and trees and all of that stuff. But granting beingness is based off of what you know and what you don't know about something. And it isn't just a physical thing, it can be a satanic or a spiritual thing. And I think that that's honestly where it resides more, because you shouldn't be living in the physical universe. If you want to grant somebody beingness, you have to be able and be willing to rise up or lower down to somebody and be able to, I mean, ultimately it's not just tolerance, it's acceptance of
Wow.
something. You have to, I mean, even on the OT levels, you do this where you imbue yourself as a thetan into physical
Hmm.
objects, which you can do. You can feel
Hmm.
physical objects with your eyes. LRH talks about this on Route to Infinity
Hmm.
course, where you can feel something with the flow that you are pushing out from the body's eyes, and you can
Right.
get a feel for it. And you don't try it because you don't know about it, but you can go out and you can feel the fabrics in a fabric store just by standing and looking at the bolts there on the shelf. And you can feel these different textures with your eyes. You can feel a woman's,
Hmm.
and I'm not trying to be creepy here, you can feel a woman's skin or a man's skin with your eyes,
Hmm.
or their clothing or their hair or the surface of a car, or whether it's clean or not. Anything you can put your eyes on. But
Right.
in order to do that, you have to be able to grant it some beingness. You would never reach for it in the first place. That's my point.
Right. Or else it wouldn't really be there. Like it
Right.
would be, it would be nebulous. It would be this thing that it is not even really there for you. And that happens a lot. I think we talked in an earlier podcast where I mentioned about, like, you could be walking in the mall somewhere, or a busy place, and a person doesn't even realize you're behind them. Like,
Mm-hmm.
their awareness is so limited in scope that they can't
Mm-hmm.
even realize that there's people in the grocery store behind them, and you gotta say,
Yeah.
excuse me. Oh, you startled me. Oh
Right.
my
Right.
gosh.
Right. Yeah.
I'm like,
Self awareness is a rare commodity these
right.
days. Yeah.
Right. I'm like, you're in a busy grocery store, and
Mm-hmm.
you didn't realize that there's somebody possibly in your space. So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so I want to, first of all, before we go too deep, I want to define beingness
Mm-hmm.
per LRH, right? It says beingness, this comes from the Hard to Find Words Dictionary. Beingness, it says, the result of having assumed an identity. This is interesting. The technical definition of beingness would be an identification with a source point or receipt point. Beingness is assumed by oneself, or given to oneself, or is attained. It could be said to be a role in a game, and examples of beingness could be one's own name, one's profession, one's physical characteristics. Each or all of these things could be called one's beingness, right? Now, I think this is interesting because in this particular space, beingness is being understood as one assuming an identity, right? One assumes an identity.
Or
And
becomes, there's becomingness. This is in the axioms.
yes,
There's only becomingness. One
right.
becomes, like, you talk to a pastor. You ever had those people where and you see this with OTs and stuff, and it's the same thing we experience. It's like people just want to talk to you. You walk up to a pastor or a priest or something like that, and you just feel like you want to talk to
Mm,
them and tell them things that are going on in your
yeah,
life because of their beingness.
right, right.
And to me,
And
that's
so
great.
Well, and so this kind of brings into this conversation. We talk about para-scientology and the whole thing, because this really is not something you can measure, right? It's not something you can put your finger on
Yeah,
necessarily. It's
it's
not
not
something that you can.
quantifiable.
Right, right, exactly. So this is more of a thetanic, qualitative kind of experience of spirit, where it's like I am being who I am being, or I
Hmm.
come to be that which I come to be. In fact, if you go in the Bible, it says, "I am that I am." The real translation is, "I come to be that which I come to be."
Hmm.
Right. And so it's like I come to be that which I come to be. And so granting beingness, per other H here, says to grant beingness is to give life to someone or something, or admit the existence of someone or something, to make come alive, to make come alive, to permit to have beingness. So if someone assumes a beingness, if somebody is operating in their own valence, right? If somebody is operating with an identity, whatever that identity is, I have a client, literally, I have a client who identifies as a fae. Fae, a fairy. That's the species of fairies called the fae.
Mm.
And she identifies as a fae, and she has a whole narrative around it, how she is not Homo sapiens. She said
Hmm.
we have very similar biology, but
Hmm.
but she's not.
Hmm.
And I have to grant beingness to that she has identifies as a fae, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
Um, so how does this work? I'm laughing not because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's like just to open your mind up to the idea, right?
Yeah.
Like, how does one how does one grant beingness to someone if they disagree with their viewpoint, or if they are critical of their narrative, whether it be a trans person, or whether it be a person of a different race, or a person of a different gender. There's
Hmm.
such things as misogynist and then misandry and whatever. How does one grant beingness if there's this criticalness?
Well, you have to take a step back and look at who do they remind you of?
Oh, wow.
Who do they remind you of? Because when you get into the you're being critical of something, you're having a critical thought, you've stimulated some sort of an overt and or withhold that's there, and you have to look at, okay, this person reminds me of X. And this is an interesting point. I've never brought this up in a podcast, but and I think all of our listeners will have seen this, that there are only so many different types of body types and facial types on the planet, whether they're oriental, whether they're black, whether they're white, whatever. There's
Mhm.
only so many different styles. And so, maybe there's 100 different styles, but you go, oh, there's that face again. I remember seeing that face, and some are more rare than others.
Mhm.
But in this pantheon of these faces, well, you've got an overt or a withhold on almost any one of those faces based off of that as an earlier similar person you've met.
Boy, oh boy.
So if you can't grant somebody beingness, well, you just have to look at it and spot who it was that you committed this overt on and clean it up real quick, and just look at it: time, place, formative event, axiom 38, boom, blow it. And then you can grant somebody beingness,
Mm.
typically,
Mhm.
because you're not withholding anymore. It's that simple, but it's that hard at the same time. Let's say, and this is going to be a controversial one, I want everybody to try and grant Donald Trump beingness.
Yeah.
Okay. And somebody that says, we just grab him by the pussy.
Yeah.
Can you grant somebody?
That's
Can you grant somebody that type of person beingness? Now, I'm not saying, I could grant him beingness, and I could be around him and everything like that. But me saying I could be around him is an indication I'm not quite fully granting him beingness.
that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because per the auditor's handbook, which we're going to get into in a minute,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
like he actually says, like granting beingness is not just like it's a duplication of.
Mm-hmm.
It's a duplication of the Thetan, right? So you're
Mm-hmm.
duplicating yourself in that. And you said it earlier, like you kind of recognize something of that person or something of that situation where you might have some overs or
Mm-hmm.
withholds, right?
Yeah.
So in me see it like you have a familiar face, or I know that look, we'll say,
Mm-hmm.
I know that look,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that, right? And so there's this thing where this thing kind of stands out to us or stands out to, yeah, that is something I want to reject. That is something I'm critical of. That is
Mm-hmm.
something I'm not dealing with. So you get somebody who talks like, uh Donald Trump or whatever, and to whatever degree there's a pushback on that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Doesn't mean you
Mm-hmm.
have to like it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to whatever degree there's a pushback on it, like ask yourself, why is there so, like, why can't that person be that person?
Right. And that made me think of the other thing. That which you resist, you become.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if you can't grant somebody or something beingness, resist, 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 you can't be cause over something that you're resisting, because you create what's called a ridge.
Right.
Or to our listeners, and this gets into the CS series, Casey Supervisor series 37R, where you get overrun on something, and so you create a ridge on it. You get overrun on bossy people, you ridge up against bossy people, and then you can't get
Mm.
along with them in the workplace. You ridge up against people that, well, and this is something that everybody runs into: control. When you
Ooh,
run into somebody
don't say
that's
that. That's a cuss word.
right, right. I'm going to control. I'm just listen to our listeners. I'm going to control this situation. Ding. Can you
Yeah.
grant them any beingness? No, because you got a button on control. I don't care
Yeah.
whether you've done objectives and gotten auditing on control and everything. You can go, okay. You still have to take a step back and go, what's this motherfucker trying to do?
So let me tell you how much LRH has impacted my life. Let me tell you this. Because even on the second dynamic, right, in the relationship space, like just using that C word,
Mm-hmm.
control,
Uh-huh.
not the other C word,
Not the
but
other
that
C
C
word,
word,
but it's almost
control.
as bad
Yeah, you might as well
for
be
more
saying it.
people. Yeah.
Um, Using that C word, control, has caused a lot, hours upon hours of discussion. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
say this, I had to stop using that word and I had to start using the word leadership, like leader,
Right, because it's a
right?
lot less stimulative.
It's a lot less, and it goes down a little bit with like a spoonful of sugar, right? And
Right.
I started to use the word leader, and then even that became a thing at one point until we cleared the word leader,
Mm-hmm.
because recently that conversation came up, and we had to, and so my 2D was like, so you're the leader, huh? You're the leader. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I said, yeah, of course. Why can't we both be the leader? I said, well, do you know the definition of leader? And so we had to clear the word leadership or leader, and it means the
Mm-hmm.
person.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, so a leader is the person, is one person. So we have to decide who's going to be the leader in this flow, right? In the
Right.
situation.
Right.
And so once I said, now you're welcome to be the leader, you just have to articulate where you leading us. Like what is that going to look like? What's the deal,
Mm-hmm.
right? If
Right.
you feel you can
What's the
lead.
blueprint for this? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And if not, then allow somebody else to lead. So once that kind of got cleared up, leadership or leading became a lot easier gradient than control.
Right.
Yeah, because people have been poorly controlled and cannot grant beingness to somebody who is able to assume
Right.
that
Right.
position.
And LRH talks about bad control a
About,
lot
yeah,
in bad control. But also the other thing that is in here in unwillingness to grant beingness is that what Ron says about help becoming betrayal.
yeah, yeah.
That's right alongside that control button, because you're like, what are you trying to help me for?
Right.
Because people have been betrayed when they accepted somebody's help.
No
And
good
that's
deed goes unpunished.
that, right. Right. And so
Mhm.
there's these two things I think are paramount into the unwillingness or the
Difficulty.
incapability, yeah, the difficulty
Hmm.
of granting somebody or something beingness, whether it's a place, a thing, or a person.
Hmm.
So you have to take those things into consideration, and that enters back into overts and withholds on all of those fronts as well. You know,
Yeah.
what help have you offered somebody and then betrayed them? Boom.
Right.
Okay, it's that, and I'm using a more street vernacular on it. You know, uh, don't be, how does it go? Don't be saying shit because you be doing shit. You know, they're
Yeah,
talking.
you're right. Yeah.
They're talking through their own overts. Yeah, the overt does speak loudly in accusation. That's where the inability to grant beingness comes from, is because you're seeing
Hmm.
through your own dirty lenses.
Right. You're seeing the condition or the position or the world or the individual or the territory, the whole Eastern Hemisphere, whatever the
Yeah,
case may be.
right. You know, what overts have I committed against Oriental people? Well, you got a minute? You know, I mean, you know, on the whole track and things like that. Well, and you know, there's some resentment there towards Oriental people. Like, you watch these YouTube videos and stuff like that, and you know, this fucking Orientals, god damn it, 5 years old, and they're playing a piano sonata better than a 40-year-old. Fuck. I just,
Is that a thing? And I never knew that was a
I'm
thing.
just saying, they're so much better at things than Anglos. They can apply
Okay.
themselves. You know, they excel at math. You look at the Japanese and how much they have their act together on things. And then on the opposite side, they have vending machines with worn women's panties in them that you can pick up in the train station. I'm
Right.
serious. I'm
That's a
serious.
thing.
That's a
Yeah.
thing in Japan, and it's okay. And yet
Right.
they don't have a child abduction rate one.
Yeah.
And that's just Japan. I mean, you know, every Oriental country is completely different than every other Oriental country.
What number one? This is rooted in my soul.
I think this is a
We
funny
don't we
treatise
don't
on
we
beingness.
no longer use the term Oriental. It's
Okay,
now just Asian.
okay. Now it's just Asian. You see,
Yeah, just
you
say
see,
Asian.
I'm
Oh
poking.
my God.
I'm being self-deprecating for a reason, because this is a
Right.
bias, and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and a bias is everything. Mr. Lawing, in my freshman biology class in high school,
Yep.
the first day of biology, he wrote it up on the board, and I was like, "What the heck is this guy talking about?" And I look back on that, and I go, "Boy, he was smart."
Yeah.
Because you have these biases that prevent you from granting beingness.
Yeah. And from knowing, like even you talk about the science class or whatever, like from even knowing new material, knowing new information, being able
Yes.
to assume new positions in space or location or ideologies or viewpoints. We're
Yep.
going to talk about viewpoints in a minute. Like it's just like this whole thing. Granting beingness is a really, really big deal, and there's a lot of processes even that LH has around them about beingness process and stuff like that. But the idea here is that when you can grant beingness to something, you imbue it with life.
That's right.
To that degree, it can become it can become something that you can be causative over, right?
Yeah.
Not in a controlling kind of like not a bad
Yeah.
control kind of way.
Yeah. Good control. Granting beingness is at the top of the band of good control
Sure.
on your part. And I think that that's a point that needs to be really put out there, is that if you can grant something beingness, you are applying good control, and you can accept both
Right.
outflow and inflow. You can accept control. Otherwise,
Right.
you can't grant beingness one.
Yeah. Yeah, because there would be no exchange. In fact, LRH talks about how granting beingness is actually a expansion of the communication formula. All
Mm-hmm.
right, where he calls that complexity of the communication formula, where it's like it's not just talking about distance from me to you, but it's
Mm-hmm.
talking about space, where you talk about being able to be in other people's space,
That's
right?
right.
So now you and I can communicate distances from, Philippines to South Africa, whatever. We
Mhm.
can communicate across distances. That's totally fine. But now you're in a whole nother space. So you're not just looking at from here to there. You're looking at all around you. You're looking at an
Right.
entire environment.
All
You're looking at an entire
inclusive.
country. Exactly. And all those that exist in that space. And
Mhm.
so it really is a part of the communication formula, or should I say, or it says a complexity of the communication formula, because we have broadly added space rather than just linear distance. It becomes all this area that you're being able to communicate with on whatever level. I'm out here looking out of my window right now and I can see the buildings on, downtown area out
Mhm.
across the distance, right? I'm on the
Mhm.
10th floor of a high rise and I can see the buildings all the way out across a distance.
Mhm.
And even that is a part of my beingness. I have to grant beingness to that. I have to
Right.
grant being able to be in the space of seeing all that and seeing the chickens. I've got people right next door, right over here, down there, have chickens. The chickens just running around. Oh my God. But
Right.
I have to.
Right. Yeah, and then that's a similar thing that I have is you have to put your anchor points, these points of reference, the four corners, the eight corners of the room, or whatever the shape of the room is. You have to expand that area out in ARC and go, okay, I'm okay with this. You get off a plane and you get into a city and everything like that. The first thing I do is find a map. I've traveled for 25 years. Find a map before we
Mhm.
had cell phones and stuff like that. Okay, where are the malls in the town? Okay, where's the city center? Okay, how far out does the city go? Is this a wonky
Mhm.
place like it is here in South Africa, where east feels different than it should, and south seems to be where east is, and all of that because of the shape of the bay and the area, and
Ah,
you have to get in ARC. Well, in the area that you live in, I when you showed it to me, I immediately I went to, okay, so this is a river, it goes along the south here,
yep.
okay,
Wow.
and you just
Yeah, I live right.
immediately,
I live right off the river. That's interesting. You notice that?
right. and and
Yeah.
and when you can do that with your spaces, and you can do it as an exercise, the you use a frame of reference. Okay, where is this? Okay, where is that?
Hmm.
Now I know. Okay, now if I go back this way, I passed a quick trip. Okay, we went past I'm talking in American terms, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's a BP gas station here on this corner, and okay, this is a busier intersection. Where does this road lead from? These are all things you can do to grant an area beingness, but you can
Hmm.
do the same thing with another person in a bit of a different way. You've got to get in communication with them. It's the same
Right.
thing.
Yeah. And so so you go in there, and so I'm gonna have to just open it up because you're really going there. So if people operate in their valences, right, whatever
they're,
multiple valences one has.
well, hopefully they're operating in their beingness. If they're in a valence, they're not being themselves. Just to make that clear
Well,
to our listeners.
I was making that distinction for a
Okay.
reason, right?
Okay.
So
Hmm.
so if a being is operating in a valence, right, which
Hmm.
is an identity, which is a personality, which is a whole thing, right? So a being operating in an identity as an identity,
Hmm.
right? LRA says beingness is assuming an identity. So beingness has assumed the identity. That identity has assumed a body.
Hmm.
Am I tracking?
Yep. You
Right?
got it.
So
Yep.
that is that identity. I'm just talking about a person now. So a being assumes an identity. The identity assumes a body. Now I'm gonna really open this thing up because the body is a result of a result, right? It's a product of a product,
Right.
right?
Well, the thetan in the body makes the body look the way that it is, and that is a parascientology subject all its
Very much
own.
so.
But we
Very much
don't
so.
we don't have time for that today. But that is part of the beingness.
Right, right. But so what LRH talks about this, and I'm going into the reference here on the Auditor's Handbook 1954, July 1954, where LRH says that when you're dealing with granting beingness, the mechanics of granting beingness, we have orientation point and symbol. The orientation point and the symbol. And he says that the orientation point is that point in relation to others have location, where others have location.
Right.
So think about it this way. You're from the Midwest,
Hmm.
right? Is that right? I can't
Yep.
remember where you're from.
Missouri.
Missouri. Okay. You're from Missouri. I'm from Alabama. Okay.
Mhm.
So we have similar but maybe different, you know, orientation points. But you can often say like your childhood home or where you were raised is how you're oriented. It's your orientation point.
Right. I have an
Go
interesting
ahead,
story I'd like to mention.
please.
And this is very interesting about beingness.
Mm-hmm.
I just was thinking, I said that I'm from Missouri. I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
That's just where my family is, so to speak, some of my
Mm,
family. I went to I was in Minneapolis working, and I came in from the airport, and there are a lot of Ethiopian and Somalian taxi drivers there. There's a huge
mm-hmm.
contingent of Ethis and Somalis there. And I got in the taxi, and the guy kept looking in his rearview mirror at me. I just said,
Mm-hmm.
hi, how are you? And everything like that. And that was it. He kept looking up in the rearview mirror, kept looking up in the rearview mirror, and he said, "You're Ethi, aren't you?" And I was like, "What?" I've got blue eyes, blonde hair,
Right,
I'm white. And I said, "How did you
right.
know that I was born in Ethiopia?" And he says,
Wow.
I know an Ethi when I see one.
Wow.
Tell me about that and beingness.
That blows my mind. Yeah,
Because there wasn't
exactly.
any outward
And so,
inclination. None. Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, you wouldn't just look at you and think that you were from Ethiopia or
Right.
born in Ethiopia. Yeah,
Yeah. I tell people here in South Africa,
yeah.
I'm from Ethiopia, and they look at me like I'm an alien. But this
Right.
guy, and it didn't happen just once. It happened twice with two different drivers, both Ethi.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Wow.
beingness, they're seeing something there that points that out to them.
Right.
So
I think that stands to be true when I talk about orientation point then,
yeah.
right? Because because on some level per LRH, the mechanics of granting beingness is orientation point and symbol. And
Mm-hmm.
so I, based on my location, based on the way I'm oriented, right? Different symbols hold different values. I think symbols, he defines symbols as mass, meaning, and mobility, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a symbol has mass, meaning, and mobility. And so whether it be the shape of your nose, whether it be the whatever the symbology that your body has displayed, somebody recognize your being from or your orientation point as Ethi, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of whatever they saw, and I
Whatever,
don't know what to say
yeah,
about it.
whatever the beingness, whatever part of the beingness is. But the thing is this is the para-scientology aspect of this.
Yes.
It is not
Yes.
something, it is not something that is biased by what you're seeing in the physical universe. It is the perception and the awareness of something there that is completely palpable, but yet not in the physical universe. Para.
Yeah. Yeah. And so now a being assumes an identity and takes on a body or
Mm-hmm.
operates with a body.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Why are so many people hung up on the body? I guess the factor is to say we start identifying with forms, but
Mm-hmm.
we're so hung up on the body expression, not realizing that behind that body expression is an identity, and behind the identity is a being, right?
Mm-hmm.
Behind that personality is a being
Yep.
that transcends all of this shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody identifies as my client identifies as a fae, right? When
Mm-hmm.
somebody identifies as that's the identity speaking, not the body,
Mm-hmm.
or that's speaking from identity, not body,
Well, it's partially
right?
created as well. I mean, they're mocking up
Sure.
that particular thing.
Yeah.
It's manifest, and they're putting it there, and that's why I was saying about these facial types and things like that. I had a close friend in the early 2000s who actually went to the ethics office because he originated that he was John Kennedy, the president, and he looked like
Got
John
it.
Kennedy. He looked like John Kennedy, the president.
Yeah.
and it came up in session, and they had some things they wanted to talk to him about, and he had to get handled in ethics for some of the things that he did to the church as John Kennedy, the president. And he looked like him
All
in
right.
this lifetime. I'm not kidding you.
That's amazing.
And he told me all kinds of stories about Marilyn Monroe and Bobby Kennedy, and they had these hidden hallways in the walls of the White House and things like that.
Hmm.
So it in a lot of cases it transfers over from one lifetime to the next, that because of what the being is putting
You
it
mock
there
it up.
as as that beingness. That's
Yeah.
Para-scientology too.
Well, and to me that makes perfect sense. Like I've always wanted to know the individual, right? Like so when I want to get to know somebody or whatever, I want to get to know the individual. I
Mhm.
don't want to just know the body, which that's just a very carnal
Yeah,
kind of viewpoint, right?
right.
Um, I don't just want to know the personality because that could be, obscure or crazy or whatever case it be. I want like who are you as a being? Like how do you choose to, express or be in this world? Who do you
Hmm.
choose to be?
Hmm.
And that I think is kind of where I come from in my travels and in my cultural explorations or whatever. And that doesn't mean it's always easy by any means. It can be very hard to be around so many different personalities and different bodies or whatever. But but just being able to recognize the symbol, right? So symbols,
Yeah.
mass meaning mobility. When I see a person of color, and I said this before, when I see a person of color here in Asia, like that symbol, it has so much beingness. I grant so much beingness in these moments
Hmm.
because not only am I able to see a symbol of what I present, but also the orientation point of it. Like, oh, where you from? Oh, you from the US? Oh, what part? Da, 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 da. Right?
Instant reality.
Instant, yeah. Because we have a shared orientation point and we have shared symbols. And the body is just a symbol, people. The body is just a symbol. It's a
Hmm.
symbol of, it has mass meaning and mobility. It's a symbol of an identity, which is a assumption of a being.
Right. You might as well be walking around with a sign on a pole and saying, "This is what I stand for."
Right, right. And which is then silly to me when we get so wrapped up in semantics and pronouns and da 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 da. It's
Hmm.
so silly because it doesn't even matter. It's just a symbol of something,
Hmm.
and that symbol then has to then convey, or as it conveys something, as it conveys meaning or whatever.
Hmm.
For those who are able to grant beingness, for those who are able to grant beingness, now I can see you. Now
Hmm.
I can grant life to you.
Yep.
Now I can put, you understand what I'm saying? It
Hmm.
becomes a broader aspect of the communication formula.
Yeah.
Now I can have ARC with you on
Hmm.
whatever level,
Hmm.
you know? So I think this is really good. Now, we talked before about GPM, goals, problems, mass,
Hmm.
and we also talked about game and no game conditions when it comes to this,
Hmm.
because break down the GPM aspect of granting beingness.
Well, you're looking at that a person has a particular goal that they're trying to
Hmm.
achieve, and then that goal gets thwarted by an opposing terminal. Let's say it's a
Hmm.
lion and it's a lion tamer type of thing, and you have to look at it from the viewpoint of what the lion tamer is trying to do. You're looking at what the lion is trying to do, and they both have an opposing terminal, one another. And
Right.
that's when you run, they run into each other like two fists bumping up against each other, or two fire hoses, and producing a big ball of water in the middle. That's the mass, that's the ridge that is created, and it ends up being a, if you can't beat them, join them type of a thing. And
Hmm.
so they flip over, and you'll find that from one lifetime to the other, a person is being the opposite of what they were the last lifetime type of thing. Now, and this can go on long chains on the time track as well. And a person could be a cold-hearted, methodical killer for millions of years, and then ends up switching sides and becomes an auditor.
Right.
This has actually
Yeah.
happened.
No, trust me, I've got in session, especially when I was doing Dianetics, and I took up a lot of stuff,
Hmm.
a lot of stuff, and where I know exactly why I picked up the body that I picked up. I know why I picked up the identity that I picked up. I know exactly why I assumed the beingness that I assumed because of some stuff happening, on my track and everything.
Right.
But it's such an interesting concept because you have these goals that you have, and when a person fails at those goals, right?
Hmm.
When a person continues to fail at those goals, they drop further and further and further out of the ability to grant beingness to
Right.
anybody really, because now I cannot accomplish, I cannot do, I
Hmm.
cannot be
Hmm.
that
As a
need to
matter as
have.
a matter of viewpoint, it's a now I'm supposed to.
Yeah, yeah.
If you're a killer, you're probably not going to like children because
Hmm.
what are children? They're future enemies. So you kill all the
Ooh,
children.
yeah. Freddy
You see,
Krueger.
yeah, you see what you see. I mean, you see what I mean. I mean, these are these viewpoints that are assumed, and so you're like, well, why don't I like children? Well, what have you done to children?
Look, speaking of
Oh,
Halloween, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees from
mm-hmm.
Friday the 13th kill all the teenagers because the teenagers used to pick on him when he was a kid.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And these are
Wow.
just packages that people pick up from these things, and they don't really understand why they have these particular viewpoints because they're long running viewpoints that aided their survival, which is goes back into valences because that's what they are. Is they're popping from one thing over to another. If you can't beat them, join them. If you can't beat them, join them. Back and forth. Goals are thwarted, and they give up on those goals, and then they take on the goals of the other valence, and da-da-da-da. And so
Hmm.
this is the person's time track. And you'll find that people have a bias towards particular beingnesses that remind them of prior opponents.
Yeah.
And they don't know
And,
why.
and and right. And thus you're making your own game. You're creating a game because without opponents, you can't have a game, right? Without some kind of
Yeah.
oppositional
Yeah. What
forces.
what what
Yeah.
what's a story without a good guy and a bad guy? I mean that's
Right.
that's that's just how it is, and that's part of a game. And you have to look at, okay, what part of this game is this person representing to me that is an oppositional terminal or an opposing terminal, and a goals problems mass the opposing terminal. This is where you find the inability to grant beingness on the whole track, affecting a person and their biases, and you have to get past
Hmm.
that. And auditing can handle that type of thing very easily.
Right. And it says here, Ellery says the resolution of this, talking about granting beingness to people and things, the resolution of this will mean a considerable increase in case.
Mm-hmm.
Considerable increase in case.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is fantastic. This is
Yeah,
fantastic.
and
So
it ends up being profiling as well. You know, it used to be like in the
that
late
was the
'80s.
word.
Run DMC, my Adidas.
Yeah.
Okay, if you didn't have Adidas on and they were brand new and they didn't have any marks on them and everything, then you weren't part of the club.
Right. Right.
It's
Well,
that it goes that low. And I'm
the
not saying anything
symbols.
against
Yeah.
Run DMC. It's just down to symbols, and that's the
Yeah.
whole thing. Is this identification or this misidentification when you've never ever really talked to a market street vendor sorry, I was almost going to say Orient in some
Parts of Asia.
yeah, in parts of Asia. You don't really know because you've got a placeholder there as a symbol instead of being able to actually get in communication, because you'd find out that they're really an interesting person if you got into ARC with them instead of
Yes.
looking at the symbol as a negative thing.
Right. I love this. Well, it
Misassociation.
seems It seems like we have rehabilitated some beingness here, granting a beingness. This is wonderful. Maybe you'll come visit me in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Um, but we again we brought this subject up during the midst of our Para-scientology series as we get ready to close out the month of October. We brought this up because we wanted or somebody actually wanted us to kind of cover it. Hopefully, this was a thorough kind of introduction to granting of beingness
Hmm.
and how you can benefit from that, how you can kind of shift your reality, how LRH says you can have a considerable increase in case
Yeah.
by just being able to grant beingness, and it does, things don't trigger you as much, things don't hurt you as much, things don't put you in effect as much when you
Yeah.
can grant beingness to it.
You've got to be able to accept, and it's something that you can do. It's a lot easier to do with auditing, but you can do it if you just practice it and expand your space out and accept things the way they are, and okay, people are people, and that's the way it is.
Oh my God. So that one last thing before we go. So LRH says this, when he says, when you can be the orientation point. Let me give you the exact reference. It says, this is done over and over without further variation. A part of the granting of beingness is having symbols out there moving around you.
Mm-hmm.
An individual who cannot be an orientation point, right? Who could not be that point of orientation, the point where things are, I'm stable in my environment and things are able to move around me. It
Right.
says the individual who cannot be an orientation point and who cannot therefore grant beingness does not have symbols. Thus, he cannot predict objects even in the immediate environment.
Mm-hmm.
So if you cannot be, because granting beingness is about being an orientation point. If you cannot grant beingness, things, people around you, whatever, you cannot have symbols, which is bodies, just symbols moving around,
Mm-hmm.
shoes, bullets, cars, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot have symbols, then you cannot predict objects in your immediate environment. You cannot predict the movement of them. You cannot predict how people are going to respond or how people are going to behave. If you cannot grant beingness, you're at total like effect to everything going on around you,
Right.
because it is telling you boom, 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 versus you being able to predict, oh yeah, I see you. I know how that's going to go. I know how this is going to end up. I know how I can cross the street without getting hit by a car because I can predict. Oh my God, this is so good.
Right. Well, and I think that at the end of the day, it is the corollary is you can grant beingness to the degree that you are being.
Ooh, that hit my spirit. God,
Mm-hmm.
that's a hallelujah moment.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Say it again.
You can grant beingness to the degree that you yourself are being,
Yes.
and that it begins
So the
with.
more,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah, well, you have to be able to grant yourself beingness and be who you are in order to be able to grant others beingness to the degree and proportion that they require, where you get a parity.
Love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yep. Yep.
I got it.
Yep. And to that degree, there is a zero criticalness. Zero.
Wow. Wow. Please share this podcast out, guys. This is something, I know we use a lot of jargon and a lot of big terms or whatever. Go clear your words if you need clear words, because this is a lot. But if you get it, you'll get it, right? If you get it, you'll get it. My grandma used to say, baby, just keep living. Just keep
Mm-hmm.
living. You're going to get it. Just keep living. And so I want you to continue to listen to the podcast. We're going to go even deeper next week. Not into granting beingness, but just in general into the Para-scientology phase as we close out the month of October. Share this podcast out. Comment. Let us know what comes to your mind, what triggers in you, what pops in your mind when you hear some of these phrases and some of these scenarios and anecdotal things that we share. Comment about it and see what comes up. I would love to engage you in more detail in the comment section down below. Anyway, take us away.
Well, folks, this is the end of our podcast, and we hope you've enjoyed it. I know I have, and we've got some really interesting things coming up next week. And if you have anything you want to hear about while we're doing the Para-scientology series, like we did with this one, we'd be happy to entertain it. Pop over to YouTube and get on our channel, subscribe, like us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're there. Next week, we're going to pilot doing video podcasts as well through StreamYard. So we'll be doing live video podcasts on YouTube, but we'll still have the audio podcast. So myself, Jonathan Burke, and Quentin Stroud, we hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you on Monday. Namaste, and we love you.
Admiration.